the only reason why the Russians have these hypersonic missiles, the reason why they've been putting so much work into their missile systems is because, well, they warned that they would do this for more than 20 years. And it was when the United States well, announced in 2001, and then, of course, it came into effect in 2002, the withdrawal from the ABM Treaty, that the Russians said, well, now we have to develop missiles which can circumvent your anti-ballistic missile shield, because the concern was it's not as if the ballistic missile shield could ever prevent a Russian first strike, because it would be too many missiles. It would be overwhelming. It's more or less fear that it's intended to enable a first strike. That is, instead of having nuclear weapons as a deterrent, that it has an offensive purpose, because it only needs to be powerful enough to absorb the retaliatory capabilities of the Russian Federation. This is a concern. And even if the United States wouldn't launch a first strike, the concern would be if they think they have the capabilities, this would essentially make them more aggressive, because now they feel they can go up the escalation ladder and the Russians would have to step down. I mean, this was the entire reason why there was an ABM treaty, that nuclear weapons shouldn't have this offensive purpose. So,
Right.
so it is strange that we just, yeah, that we put all these incentives in place for Russia to develop these weapons. But what do you think the Russians haven't put warheads on them? Because this is the first time the Russians had developed the Oreshnik. I think it was back in June. They launched one without a warhead as a warning, and this time they launched one without a warning in western Ukraine, near the border of Poland. So,
Well, let me, Glenn,
yeah.
let me correct you on that. Actually, what I've read is the Russians did warn the United States 3 hours before launching, because they wanted to make sure that the United States, who has satellites that monitor launches of what could be an intercontinental ballistic missile, would understand what we're launching is this intermediate missile. We're not going to tell you where it's going in Ukraine, but it is confined to Ukraine. So they were warned in advance. And then the United States started calling around people saying, watch out, something bad's coming.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was related to that warning, but I did see that the US warned its, I think it's embassy staff or something
No,
to,
correct.
was that
Yeah, that
related to this
well,
warning?
that was unrelated. That was unrelated, and
Okay.
because that happened like a couple of days ago.
Oh,
I
sorry.
think, well, I think they may have, the embassy may have been warned by the Russians saying, "Look, we are going to retaliate, and we're going to retaliate, but it'll be within Ukraine." So, the United States took that as, okay, hey, Americans, get the hell out, keep a low profile, etc. But the specific launch of the Oreshnik, apparently the United States was told about that 2 to 3 hours beforehand. So again, Russia's trying to avoid doing anything unilaterally that could be misinterpreted to, spin this off up into a nuclear war.
Well, in terms of seizing the Russian ships, though, I mean, much like
Mm.
the withdrawing from the anti-ballistic missile treaty encouraged Russia to develop the hypersonic missile. We see that this new trend of either doing piracy, that is hijacking ships, or attacking ships. Initially they pretended it was, well, they still pretend it was Ukraine who attacked all the Russian vessels, even in the Mediterranean, but it's becoming more and more shameless, I guess.
Yeah.
Less need to cover up what they're doing. So it's this kind of incrementalism. But given that that this is the new approach to Russia, it seems very predictable that the consequence will be that Russia will begin to protect its vessels more and more with military force, which means that the Russian Navy is going to be much more active in the Baltic Sea. It's going to be much more active in the Black Sea, and also in the Arctic, or anywhere they go. Where do you see this leading? Because um, again, the US would feel more confident here, given that it's a much greater maritime power. But this is the risk of war by miscalculations growing
Yeah.
dramatically, though.
Yeah. Well, let me go back to the illustration I was trying to use about being an analyst, a Russian intelligence analyst, having to inform President Putin, or to, answer his questions about what are the U.S. intentions, what are the U.S. capabilities. So turn the question around, and President Putin could ask me, Uh, Mr. Johnson, can you give me one example where the United States put a priority on international law in terms of limiting its actions? And I'd have to say no. Um, the piracy at sea was what's the difference that and piracy on land when they abduct and kidnap an elected president? Now, we can claim that he's illegal and illegitimate, but it's still within the confines of Venezuela. We may not like it, but he still was viewed internationally as the elected leader. And so the answer is, well, no, I can't. So you start with the presumption, the United States is not bound by any kind of legal constraints whatsoever. It's instead might makes right. If they think they can get away with it, they're going to do it. So, from Russia's standpoint, they've in the past used a lot of these, they call them ghost ships, but all that means is these ships are no longer insured by Lloyd's of London. They're insured out of either China or Russia. Uh, I think Russia and China are now coming to the point, what we're going to do? We're going to flag these vessels with our own flags. It's Russian and Chinese flag vessels. And it wouldn't surprise me that Russia would start deploying a platoon, 15 to 30, special forces on these ships to protect them so that any inbound helicopter would face the potential of lethal fire. And similarly, any attempt by Navy SEALs to try to board a ship underway would face, gunfire from on board. You don't want to get to that point, but that would be a better option than risking the confrontation of once the ship's taken. There has been, I think, a gross overestimation of the importance of Venezuelan oil to say like China. That I look at what the Chinese was doing was they're doing a favor for Venezuela to buy its oil. They didn't need it. It's like here in the United States every year we have this organization. It's called the Girl Scouts. It's for girls between like 8 and 13. And one of the things they do annually to raise money is they sell cookies. Well, this is like, think of China as like they've got their own cookie manufacturing company, but their next door neighbor, there's this little girl, they're going to buy some cookies from her. That's what they were doing with China. They were buying cookies from China, only in this case it was oil to help the Venezuelan economy, but it wasn't something that China was dependent upon, that China had no alternative source for such oil. Not the case. But it was again China trying to build influence by providing money, providing assistance, as opposed to threatening and using military coercion.
Yeah, well, it's often been pointed out that the Chinese would, if they can't buy oil other places, they would be more dependent on Russian oil, which would only bring them closer. And if you read the work of Russian Eurasianists, especially in the early 20th century, the main argument was that our weakness is that we try to develop as a Western European country, that as a maritime power. But
Yeah.
we are a Eurasian power, so they're controlling the seas anyways, and they will always try to constrain our development by blocking us at the sea. What we should do is instead look east, form land corridors, connect with all the Eurasian and Asian great powers. It just seems
Yeah.
that there's some unforeseen consequences here. Um,
Well,
but
let me just
yeah,
interject. This is providing more evidence to support our mutual friend Sergei Karaganov's position of, hey, the future's in the East, not the West. I mean, this is like Donald Trump's making Sergei's case for him.